Michelle Jackson stared at the pregnancy test in her hand, her heart sinking as she saw the single line appear once again. She'd lost count of how many tests she'd taken over the past 5 years, but the result was always the same. The master. Bathroom of their Beverly Hills mansion felt too big, too empty, just like her hopes of becoming a mother. "Mrs. Jackson," Maria, their housekeeper, called from outside. "Mr. Jackson is home early today." Michelle quickly wiped her tears and tossed the test in the trash. James couldn't see her like this, not again. At 38, she was running out of time, and she knew it. Her husband, one of Los Angeles' most successful real estate developers, had been patient through all the fertility treatments and disappointments. But lately, something had changed. She walked down the curved marble staircase, her heels clicking against the steps. James stood in the foyer, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled as always, but he barely looked up from his phone. 5 years ago, he would have greeted her with a kiss and that bright smile that had made her fall in love with him at first sight. "We need to talk," James said, finally putting his phone away. Those 4 words made Michelle's stomach turn. "Of course, honey. Is everything okay at work?" She tried to keep her voice steady, leading him to their living room where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening. James loosened his tie and sat in his favorite leather armchair. "I had lunch with Richard today. His daughter Jessica just graduated from UCLA. She's starting at the company next week." Michelle nodded, remembering the young blonde from the company Christmas party last year. She'd been all smiles and designer, clothes fresh-faced and barely 22. "That's nice," Michelle said, but something in James's expression made her heart race. "Michelle, I've been thinking a lot lately." He paused, running his hand through his hair. "We've been trying for so long, and maybe it's time to accept that some things aren't meant to be." "We can try another round of IVF," Michelle said quickly. "Dr. Stevens said there are new treatments. I'm leaving you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Michelle gripped the edge of the sofa, her knuckles turning white. "What?" "I want children, Michelle. A family, and Jessica, she's young, she can give me that." The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. The late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the way he'd stopped holding her hand in public. "Jessica," Michelle's voice cracked. "She's half your age, James. You barely know her." "We've been seeing each other for 6 months." James wouldn't meet her eyes. "I've already talked to my lawyers. You'll be well taken care of course. The house in Malibu, a generous settlement. 6 months. Michelle stood up, her legs shaking. "While I was going through hormone treatments and crying myself to sleep, you were with her." "I didn't want it to happen this way." James pulled an envelope from his jacket. "But we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time." Michelle watched as he placed the divorce papers on the coffee table. 20 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of legal documents. "Get out." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Michelle, get out." She grabbed a crystal vase from the table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, sending flowers and water across the expensive hardwood. James backed away, looking startled by her outburst. "My lawyers will be in touch. I'm sorry it had to end like this." Michelle stood frozen as he walked out, the front door closing with a quiet click that seemed to echo through the empty house. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, surrounded by broken glass and scattered roses. Maria appeared silently, beginning to clean up the mess. "Mrs. Jackson, should I call someone? Your sister, maybe?" "No." Michelle wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. "No, I need to be alone." That night, Michelle lay in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling. The house felt like a museum of their life together. Photos from their wedding, souvenirs from their travels, the nursery down the hall that had never been used. 20 years of memories, and all it took was a younger woman to make James forget every single one. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends and family. Word traveled fast in their social circle. She could already imagine the whispers, the pitying looks, the social invitations that would suddenly stop coming. But as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, something shifted inside Michelle. She thought of everything she'd given up for James, her career as a marketing executive, her dreams of starting her own business, her identity beyond being Mrs. James Jackson. She got up and walked to her closet, pulling out a small box she'd kept hidden behind her shoes. Inside was a business plan she'd worked on secretly over the years, during all those lonely nights when James was working late. A luxury skincare line specifically designed for women of color, something she'd been passionate about since her modeling days in college. Enough, she whispered to herself, clutching the papers. James might have taken her dreams of motherhood, but he couldn't take everything. It was time to show him and everyone else that Michelle Jackson was more than just a rich man's wife. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Lisa, it's Michelle. Remember that business idea we used to talk about? I think it's time." The sun rose over Beverly Hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the Jackson mansion, a woman sat at her vanity, carefully applying her makeup-like armor for the battle ahead. Michelle looked at her reflection, really looked at herself for the first time in years. She saw the strength in her eyes, the determination in her jaw, the beauty that went far deeper than the designer clothes and perfect hair. James might have chosen youth over loyalty, but Michelle was about to choose herself over everything else. And that was just the beginning. Lisa Martinez rushed into the coffee shop, her designer handbag swinging wildly as she looked for her old friend. She spotted Michelle sitting in a corner booth, stirring her untouched latte. 20 years ago, they'd been roommates in college, dreaming up business plans between classes. Now Lisa owned one of the most successful PR firms in Los Angeles. "I came as soon as I could," Lisa said, sliding into the booth. "I saw the pictures in the society pages. James at that charity gala with that child." Michelle's hand tightened around her cup. The photos had been everywhere. James and Jessica, looking like the perfect couple. The articles all focused on their whirlwind romance, conveniently, forgetting about the wife he'd left behind. "I don't want to talk about James," Michelle said firmly. "I want to talk about business." Lisa's eyebrows shot up as Michelle pulled out her business plan. The pages were worn at the edges from years of reading and revising. "Glow Up Beauty," Michelle explained. "A skincare line for women of color, using natural ingredients and advanced technology. I've been researching it for years, testing formulas in my spare time." "While James was running around with his little girlfriend," Lisa couldn't help adding. "While I was waiting for my life to start," Michelle corrected her. "I have some money saved and the divorce settlement will give me enough to get started. But I need your help with marketing and connections." Lisa studied her friend's face. The defeated woman from the gossip columns was gone. In her place sat someone Lisa hadn't seen in years, the Michelle who'd won every debate competition in college, who'd never taken no for an answer. "You know this won't be easy, right? The beauty industry is brutal. And James, he has connections everywhere." "I'm counting on it." Michelle smiled, but there was steel in her eyes. "I want him to see exactly what he threw away." They spent the next few hours planning. Lisa made calls, set up meetings, pulled strings she'd been carefully collecting over years in the business. By the time they left the coffee shop, Michelle had appointments with 3 major cosmetic laboratories and a meeting with a potential investor. Back at the mansion, Michelle walked into her home office. She'd barely used it in years, too busy, playing the perfect wife at charity events and dinner parties. Now it would become the headquarters of her new life. Maria appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Jackson, there's someone here to see you." Patricia Thompson walked in, elegant as always, in her Chanel suit. As James's mother, she'd been Michelle's mother-in-law for 20 years. Michelle braced herself for accusations or demands to sign the divorce papers. Instead, Patricia marched straight to Michelle and hugged her. "That son of mine is an idiot," Michelle felt tears welling up for the first time since that night. Patricia had always been more than a mother-in-law. She'd been a mentor, a friend. "I'm not here to take sides," Patricia said, settling into a chair. "But I am here to invest in your company." Michelle stared at her. "How did you—" "Lisa called me." Patricia smiled. "Did you really think I'd let my favorite daughter-in-law start a business without my help? I may have given birth to James, but right now you're the only child of mine showing any sense. James will be furious. Good. Patricia pulled out her checkbook. Let him be. Sometimes a man needs to lose everything to understand what he had. Now, tell me about this skincare line. As Michelle explained her plans, she felt energy coursing through her veins. Every time she said the words "my company" instead of "my husband," she stood a little taller. The next morning, Michelle walked into her first laboratory meeting. The chief chemist, Dr. Sarah Chen, listened intently as Michelle described her. Vision. Natural ingredients, but with scientific backing, Michelle explained. I want real results, not just pretty packaging. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. We can start trials next week. But you should know, one of our biggest clients is Thompson Real Estate's preferred supplier. Of course, James's company. Michelle squared her shoulders. Then they'll have a front row seat to what we create. That evening, Michelle's sister Rachel came over with takeout and determination. We're clearing out his stuff, she announced. Marching upstairs, they spent hours packing James's clothes, his golf trophies, the little pieces of him that had filled their home. Each item that went into a box felt like a weight, lifting from Michelle's shoulders. In his closet, Rachel found a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond necklace, clearly meant for Jessica, with a card dated 2 months before he'd left. That lying piece of... Rachel started, but Michelle cut her off. Put it with the rest, she said calmly. I don't need his jewelry anymore. I'm going to build my own diamonds. Later that night, alone in her bedroom, Michelle opened her laptop. Her inbox was full of emails from the meetings Lisa had set up. Potential investors, manufacturers, designers, ready to work on packaging. The business she'd dreamed of for so long was finally taking shape. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. The lawyers need your signature. Stop stalling. Michelle looked at her reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back wasn't just James Jackson's ex-wife anymore. She was the founder and CEO of Glow Up Beauty, and she was just getting started. She typed back a single word. Soon. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Michelle had spent 20 years being the perfect wife, following his dreams. Now it was time for her own story to begin, and this time she was writing every page herself. The Beverly Hills Country Club dining room buzzed with whispers as Michelle walked in for Sunday brunch. She'd skipped the weekly tradition for 2 months after James left, but today was different. She wore a red dress that made her dark skin glow, her head held high as she made her way to her usual table. Jessica was there, draped over James's arm like a designer accessory. She looked up as Michelle approached, her blue eyes widening with surprise. James nearly choked on his mimosa. Michelle, he managed to say, I didn't expect to see you here. Clearly, Michelle replied, settling at the next table. But I'm a founding member, remember? Long before you met your friend, the waiter appeared instantly. For Mrs. Jackson, your usual table is ready. It's Miss Carter now, Jessica piped up, flashing her enormous engagement ring. Or it will be soon. Michelle smiled, the kind of smile that could freeze champagne. Actually, I'm keeping the name. For business purposes. James's fork clattered against his plate. Business purposes. Oh, didn't your mother tell you? She's my primary investor. We had the most interesting conversation about it at the board meeting last week. The color drained from James's face. His mother sat on the boards of several major companies, including his own. If she was investing in Michelle's business. Mother hasn't mentioned anything to me, he said stiffly. No? How strange. We're launching next month. Glow Up Beauty. Maybe you've heard of it? The buzz in the industry is quite exciting. Jessica tugged at James's sleeve. Honey, we'll be late for the yacht club. Michelle watched them leave, noting how James's shoulders had tensed. He knew what his mother's support meant in their social circle. The tables were turning. Back at her office, a sleek space in downtown Los Angeles that Lisa had helped her find, Michelle reviewed the latest product samples with Dr. Chen. The formula was perfect. A blend of traditional African botanicals with cutting-edge science. The clinical trials are showing amazing results, Dr. Chen reported, especially for hyperpigmentation and aging concerns. We're ready for production. Michelle picked up one of the elegant black and gold bottles. Her own face would be on the packaging, a successful black woman over 40, proud of her age and her skin. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. James just called. He's furious. Good job, darling. But the victory was short-lived. An hour later, Lisa burst into the office, her face grim. We have a problem. Someone's been calling our suppliers, spreading rumors about financial instability. 3 of them just pulled out. Michelle didn't need to ask who was behind it. James, he's trying to kill the company before it launches. And that's not all. Jessica's father's company just bought the building. They're tripling our rent. Michelle walked to the window, looking out at the city she'd called home for 2 decades. Every contract, every connection in this town had James's fingerprints on them. He'd made sure of that during their marriage. He thinks he can stop me, Michelle said quietly, just like he thought he could replace me. Her phone rang again. This time it was Rachel. Turn on the TV, entertainment tonight. Michelle grabbed the remote, switching on the office television. Her heart stopped as she saw Jessica, perfectly made up and tearful, giving an interview. I just feel so terrible, Jessica was saying. James was in such a sad situation. His wife couldn't give him children and she let herself go. He tried to stay, but when we met, it was just fate. The bottle in Michelle's hand shook. Let myself go? Rachel's voice crackled through the phone. I'm coming over there right now. We'll sue them for slander. No. Michelle set the bottle down carefully. No lawsuits, no drama. I have a better idea. She called an emergency meeting with her team. They worked through the night, redesigning the marketing campaign. When the sun rose, Michelle knew exactly what she had to do. She drove to the cemetery, something she hadn't done in months. Her mother's grave was covered in fresh flowers. Patricia had been taking care of it. Hey, Mama, Michelle said softly, placing a rose on the headstone. Do you remember how you always said God doesn't give you anything you can't handle? Well, I'm handling it, just like you taught me. Her mother had built a successful catering business from nothing, raising 2 daughters alone after their father died. She'd taught Michelle that success was the best revenge. Back at the office, Michelle gathered her team. We're moving up the launch, 2 weeks from today. But the suppliers, Lisa started, I found new ones, better ones, companies owned by women, many of them minorities. We're not just launching a product line anymore. We're starting a movement. The new campaign would feature real women, all over 40, all successful in their own right. Doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, women who had been told they were too old, too dark, too much, and succeeded anyway. That night, Michelle sat in her home office looking at old photos. She found one from her wedding day, she and James, young and in love, with their whole lives ahead of them. She'd thought that was her happy ending, but as she looked at the business plan spread across her desk, the sample products lined up like soldiers ready for battle, she realized something. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of James and Jessica at dinner with the message, "Thought you should see how happy we are." Michelle didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and typed out a press release. Glow Up Beauty announces groundbreaking launch, celebrating women who refuse to be invisible. Let them play their little games. Michelle had spent 20 years being the perfect wife, the silent partner, the woman who couldn't have children. Now she was becoming something else entirely, a force to be reckoned with. And James? He was about to learn that the woman he'd underestimated was just getting warmed up. The day of the Glow Up Beauty launch arrived with a media frenzy that took even Lisa by surprise. The line of women outside Sephora stretched around the block, and TV crews jostled for position near the entrance. I can't believe how many people are here, Rachel said, peeking through the curtain. The store had closed for the private launch event, and the guest list read like a who's who of Los Angeles society. Michelle stood backstage, wearing a dress that showed off her glowing skin. Dr. Chen had outdone herself with the formulas, and Michelle had been her own best test subject. At 42, she'd never looked better. 5 minutes until we start, Lisa announced, then lowered her voice. And heads up, James just arrived with company. Michelle's heart skipped, but her face remained calm. Of course he'd come. The launch was the biggest beauty event of the season, and Jessica's father owned shares in Sephora. They couldn't ignore it without raising questions. The lights dimmed, and Michelle took her place on stage. The crowd fell silent as she began to speak. 20 years ago, I stopped dreaming, she said into the microphone. I became someone's wife, and I thought that was enough. I was wrong. In the audience, James shifted uncomfortably. Jessica clung to his arm, her smile fixed and brittle. Glow-up beauty isn't just about looking younger, Michelle continued. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. Every woman has a second chapter waiting to be written. The presentation was flawless. The before and after photos drew gasps from the crowd. Orders started pouring in before Michelle even finished speaking. But it was the final announcement that caused the biggest stir. 10% of all profits will go to the New Beginnings Foundation, Michelle revealed, providing fertility treatments and support to women who can't afford them. The applause was deafening. In the front row, Patricia wiped away tears, while James looked like he'd been slapped. Jessica's perfect smile cracked slightly. At the reception afterward, Michelle worked the room like she'd been born for it. Buyers from major retailers clamored for meetings. Beauty editors praised the innovative formulas. But the real drama was unfolding by the champagne bar. What do you mean you're cutting the budget? Jessica's voice carried across the room. She faced James, her cheeks flushed with more than just champagne. The company's going through some changes, James replied. Tersely, we need to be conservative right now. Conservative? You promised me a summer house in the Hamptons, and I already put a deposit on the wedding venue. Michelle pretended not to hear, but she caught Patricia's knowing smile. The older woman had mentioned that James's company was facing challenges. Several major clients had quietly switched to competitors, following Patricia's lead. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Michelle found herself face-to-face with James at the coat check. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "The launch seems successful." "Thank you," Michelle smiled politely. "How are the wedding plans coming along?" Before James could answer, Jessica stormed up, her eyes blazing. "Your mother is ruining everything," she hissed at James. "First she sides with her and now she's threatening to change her will?" "Jessica, not here." James grabbed her arm, but she yanked away. "No, you promised me a life of luxury. Instead, all I hear about is budget cuts and downsizing. Meanwhile, your ex-wife is becoming the next Estee Lauder." The few remaining guests turned to stare. Michelle saw Lisa discreetly signaling the photographer she'd hired. "This would make interesting headlines tomorrow. I think you both need some privacy," Michelle said smoothly. "Oh, and Jessica, that foundation you're wearing, all wrong for your skin tone. You should try Glow Up's new line. We have a shade called Karma that would be perfect for you." Back home that night, Michelle kicked off her heels and sank into her favorite chair. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with congratulations and orders. The website had crashed twice from traffic. Maria brought her a cup of tea. "The Garden magazine called again, Mrs. Jackson. They want to feature the house in their next issue." "Tell them yes," Michelle said. "It's time to show off the renovations." She'd transformed the mansion in the past few months, replacing James's dark leather and heavy furniture with light, airy pieces. The unused nursery was now her home office, painted in confident shades of gold and black, the colors of her brand. A text from Patricia lit up her phone. "Did you see the numbers? Orders from 3 major chains. And you should hear what Jessica said to James in the parking lot. That girl shows her true colors more every day." Michelle smiled. She'd known women like Jessica before, young, beautiful, and absolutely certain that youth and beauty were enough. But James was starting to learn what Michelle had known all along. Beauty fades, but character lasts forever. Her security system pinged, showing a car pulling up to the gate. Michelle checked the camera and froze. It was James, alone. "Should I let him in?" Maria asked anxiously. Michelle thought for a moment. "No," she said finally. "Whatever he has to say can wait until tomorrow. Tonight is for celebrating." She walked out to her balcony, looking over the city lights. Somewhere out there, a younger version of herself was probably crying over a man who'd left her for someone else. Michelle wished she could tell that woman what she knew now, that sometimes losing everything is just life's way of showing you what you're capable of winning on your own. Her phone buzzed one last time. "A message from Dr. Chen. You'll want to see this. The lab results from our competitor's new line, the one Jessica's father invested in. There are problems." Michelle smiled into the darkness. The night wasn't over yet, and tomorrow promised to be even more interesting. Michelle stared at the lab reports spread across her desk, her hands shaking slightly. Dr. Chen had been thorough in her analysis of their competitors' products, the line backed by Jessica's father and James's company. The results were shocking. These ingredients are banned in Europe, Dr. Chen explained, pointing to the chemical compounds. They can cause severe allergic reactions, maybe worse. How did they get FDA approval? Lisa, who'd been making calls all morning, hung up her phone with a grim expression. Money talks. Jessica's father has connections in the regulatory department. They fast-tracked the approval. Michelle thought of all the women who would buy these products, trusting them to be safe. Women like her mother, who died of cancer after years of using skincare products that promised miracles, but delivered poison. "We have to do something," Michelle said. "If we go public, James and his friends will destroy us," Lisa warned. "They'll say it's just revenge for the divorce," the intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Jackson?" Maria's voice was unusually urgent. "Miss Jessica is here. She's crying." Michelle exchanged surprised looks with Lisa. "Send her in." Jessica burst into the office, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. She looked younger than ever, more like a lost girl than the seductress who'd stolen Michelle's husband. "I need your help," Jessica sobbed. "Daddy's company. The products." "James knew. He knew and he didn't tell me." Michelle offered Jessica a tissue. "Slow down. What exactly did James know?" "The ingredients. They're making people sick. A woman in San Diego had to go to the hospital." Jessica dabbed at her eyes. "I found the reports on James's desk. He's been covering it up because Daddy threatened to pull his investment in the real estate project." Michelle felt a cold anger settle in her stomach. James had always cared about money, but this was a new low. "Why are you telling me this?" Michelle asked carefully. "Because you're the only one who's ever stood up to them and won." Jessica's lip trembled. "And I'm pregnant." The words hit Michelle like a physical blow. The one thing she'd never been, able to give James, a child. But looking at Jessica's terrified face, she felt no jealousy, only pity. "Does James know?" Jessica shook her head. "I just found out. But after seeing those reports, I don't want my baby's father to be someone who would hurt people for money." Michelle sat back in her chair, thinking fast. She had everything. She needed to destroy James and Jessica's father. But the girl in front of her wasn't an enemy anymore. She was just another woman who'd learned the hard way that men like James cared more about power than people. "Here's what we're going to do," Michelle said finally. "You're going to write down everything you know, names, dates, documents. Then you're going to go stay with my sister Rachel. She has a beach house in Malibu where reporters can't find you." "What are you going to do?" Michelle smiled, but there was steel in her eyes. "I'm going to finish what I started, not for revenge, for justice." After Jessica left, Lisa looked at Michelle in amazement. "You're helping her, after everything." "I'm helping every woman who's ever been used by men like James," Michelle replied. "Call Patricia. We need to move fast." The next few days were a blur of activity. Michelle's team worked around the clock, gathering evidence and preparing documents. Patricia arranged an emergency board meeting at James's company. The story broke on a Monday morning. Every major news outlet carried the headlines: "Beauty brand scandal, toxic products and corporate cover-up." James's name was everywhere, along with Jessica's father. Michelle watched from her office as reporters swarmed the Thompson real estate building. Her phone rang. "James, what have you done?" he demanded. "I didn't do anything, James. Your own choices did this. Jessica's missing. Her father's company is under investigation. Our biggest project is falling apart." "How does it feel?" Michelle asked quietly. "To watch everything you built crumble because you trusted the wrong people?" There was a long silence. "I never meant for any of this to happen. You meant to leave me for a younger woman. You meant to try to destroy my company. The rest?" Michelle's voice hardened. "That's just karma." She hung up and walked to her window, looking out at the city she'd once thought belonged to James. Now her billboards were everywhere, featuring women of all ages and colors, glowing with confidence. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Jessica's safe. Morning sickness is hitting her hard, but she's okay. She wants to know if you'll help her find a good lawyer. Michelle smiled. 20 years ago, she'd thought being Mrs. James Jackson was her happy ending. Now she knew better. Real happiness wasn't about being chosen by a man, it was about choosing yourself. The intercom buzzed again. Mrs. Jackson, Dr. Chen is here. With the new formula samples, and People magazine wants to do a cover story. They're calling you the Queen of Second Chances. Send them both in, Michelle said. She had work to do. That evening, she visited her mother's grave again. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the same colors as her best-selling highlighter. You were right, Mama, she whispered. God doesn't give you anything you can't handle, and sometimes what looks like a curse is really a blessing in disguise. She placed a bottle of her newest product on the grave, a moisturizer named Grace, her mother's name. The label promised more than beauty. It promised transformation, and Michelle Jackson knew all about transformation. She'd gone from being a wife who couldn't have children to a woman who was helping others build new lives. It wasn't the story she'd planned, but it was better than anything she could have imagined. As she drove home, her phone lit up with another text from Patricia. Board meeting tomorrow. James is out. They're offering you his seat. Michelle smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting to be someone's wife or mother. She was fighting to be herself, and that was a fight she knew she could win. James Thompson stood in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at the gray hairs that seemed to have multiplied overnight. His Italian suits didn't fit as well anymore. Stress had taken its toll over the past month. The newspapers on his counter told the story. Thompson empire crumbling. Beauty industry scandal claims more victims. SEC launches. Investigation. His phone buzzed. Another text from Jessica's father demanding answers. The old man had lost millions when the toxic beauty product story broke. Now he was threatening to reveal even more secrets if James didn't fix things. The doorbell rang. James found Patricia on his doorstep, elegant as always in her designer suit. "Mother?" he said warily. "What are you doing here?" "Picking up the pieces of my son's mistakes. Again." She walked past him into the living room of his bachelor apartment. It was nothing like the mansion he'd shared with Michelle, all chrome and leather, trying too hard to look modern. "If you're here about the board meeting, I'm here about your child," Patricia cut him off. "The one Jessica is carrying, my grandchild." James sank into a chair. "How did you know?" "I know everything, James, I always have, including how you tried to destroy Michelle's company when all she did was succeed without you." Across town, Michelle sat in her expanded office suite, now taking up an entire floor of a prestigious building. The view of Los Angeles stretched out before her, but her attention was on the young woman sitting across from her. "The morning sickness is better," Jessica said, looking more like a college student than ever in her simple sundress. "Rachel's been amazing, teaching me about pregnancy, nutrition and stuff. Have you thought about what you want to do after the baby comes?" Michelle asked gently. Jessica twisted her hands in her lap. The enormous engagement ring was gone. "I want to go back to school. I was studying marketing before everything." Michelle nodded. "We have an internship program, part-time, with flexible hours for student mothers. Lisa runs it." "Why are you being so nice to me?" Jessica blurted out. "I ruined your marriage." "No, honey, James ruined our marriage. You were just young and believed his lies, like I did 20 years ago." The intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Jackson? Mr. Thompson is here. He's demanding to see you." Michelle and Jessica exchanged looks. "Send him in," Michelle said firmly. James burst through the door, then stopped short when he saw Jessica. He looked older, tired. His usual confident swagger was gone. "So it's true," he said, staring at Jessica's slightly rounded belly. "When were you going to tell me?" "When were you going to tell me about the toxic ingredients?" Jessica shot back. "Or about the bribes to the FDA? I was protecting our future." "You were protecting your money," Michelle interrupted, standing up. "The same way you always have. That's why you left me, isn't it? Not because Jessica was younger, but because you thought children would secure your inheritance from your mother." James's face went pale. "How did you—" "Patricia showed me the trust agreement." No heir, no control of the family fortune. That's why you panicked when I couldn't get pregnant. That's why you jumped at the chance with Jessica. It wasn't like that, James protested weakly. Really? Jessica stood up, one hand protectively over her stomach. Then why did you ask me to get genetic testing done the day after I told you about the baby? Michelle walked around her desk, her heels clicking on the marble floor. You haven't changed, James. You're still the same scared little boy trying to buy love with money and control. Rich words from someone who turned our divorce into a marketing campaign, James snapped. No, I turned my pain into purpose. There's a difference. Michelle pressed a button on her desk. Security will show you out. Oh, and James, the board meeting tomorrow, don't bother coming. Your resignation has already been accepted. After James left, Jessica burst into tears. Michelle held her while she cried, remembering all the tears she'd shed over the same man. What am I going to do? Jessica sobbed. I can't raise a baby alone. You're not alone, Michelle said firmly. You have me, Rachel, Patricia. We're all here for you. That evening, Michelle hosted a dinner at her house. Patricia was there along with Rachel, Lisa, and Jessica. The younger woman had moved into Michelle's guest house, away from the press and her father's anger. To new beginnings, Patricia raised her glass. The others followed suit, Jessica with her sparkling water. And to family, Michelle added, the kind we choose for ourselves. Later, after everyone had left, Michelle sat in her garden. The roses she'd planted after James left were blooming, their scent filling the warm night air. Her phone lit up with a news alert. Thompson Real Estate CEO steps down amid scandal. A text from Patricia followed. It's done. The company's yours if you want it. Michelle smiled but shook her head as she replied, keep it in the family. Save it for the baby. She had her own empire now, built not on lies and manipulation, but on helping women find their strength. Next week, Glow Up Beauty would launch its new charity initiative, providing job training and support for women starting over. The security camera pinged again. This time, it showed James sitting in his car at the gate, just staring at the house they'd shared. Michelle watched him through the cameras, feeling nothing but pity. He'd lost everything that mattered, while she'd found everything she never knew she needed. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from Jessica. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. Michelle looked up at the stars, thinking about how life had a way of coming full circle. She'd thought she was broken when James left, but really, she had just been ready to become something new, something better. And as for James, let him sit out there looking at the life he'd thrown away. Michelle had a meeting tomorrow with investors from Paris. Her company was going international, and this was just the beginning. After all, the best revenge wasn't just success. It was succeeding so brilliantly that your enemies became irrelevant. And Michelle Jackson had only just begun to shine. The Paris meeting room overlooked the Eiffel Tower, but Michelle barely noticed the view. She was focused on the contracts in front of her, documents that would make Glow Up Beauty a global brand. The French executives had been skeptical at first, but the numbers spoke for themselves. Madam Jackson, the head of European operations, said, your success in America is impressive, but Europe is different. Our consumers are more traditional. Michelle smiled, thinking of all the times she'd heard that word. Traditional. Like when James's friends had called her a traditional wife, meaning she should stay quiet and look pretty. Traditional isn't always better, she replied, pulling up the presentation Lisa had prepared. Look at these numbers. Women over 40 control 60% of beauty spending in Europe. But who do they see in advertisements? 20-year-olds. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Jessica's ultrasound today. It's a girl. Michelle's heart warmed, even as she stayed focused on the meeting. In the 6 months since the scandal, Jessica had become like a younger sister. The pregnancy had been difficult, but she was blooming now, taking online classes and helping with Glow Up's social media. The meeting ended with handshakes and signed contracts. Michelle's European launch would start in 3 months, but as she packed up her briefcase, her assistant rushed in. Mrs. Jackson, there's a problem back home. Someone's leaked confidential product formulas to the press. Michelle's blood ran cold. Only a handful of people had access to those formulas. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "It's bad," Lisa said without preamble. "The leak came from inside. And there's more. Someone's been talking to reporters about Jessica living in your guest house. They're trying to spin it like you're holding her hostage or something." "James?" Michelle said through gritted teeth. "It has to be him." But when she called Patricia, she learned James was in rehab. The stress of losing everything had driven him to pills and alcohol. He could barely take care of himself, let alone orchestrate corporate espionage. "It's Richard," Patricia said, naming Jessica's father. "He's desperate. The FDA investigation wiped him out, and now he's looking for revenge." Michelle's flight back to Los Angeles was the longest 8 hours of her life. She found Jessica waiting in her office, pale and shaking. "Daddy called," Jessica said. He said if I don't come home and help him destroy you, he'll make sure I never see a penny of my trust fund. He said he'll tell everyone the baby isn't really James's." "Is it?" Michelle asked quietly. Jessica burst into tears. "Of course it is. But Daddy knows how to make lies sound true. He's been doing that his whole life." Michelle sat next to the sobbing girl, remembering how it felt to have your whole world controlled by men who thought money could buy anything, even the truth. "Listen to me," Michelle said firmly. "Your father can't hurt you anymore. You're family now, and I protect my family." That night, Michelle called an emergency board meeting in her home office. Lisa was there, along with Dr. Chen and their legal team. Patricia joined by video call. "The formulas that were leaked," Dr. Chen said. "They're old ones. I changed everything 3 months ago when we started European production. Richard leaked worthless information." Michelle smiled. After James's betrayal, she'd learned to trust no one completely. Every formula, every document was protected by layers of security. "But we can use this," Lisa added. "Make him think he's won, then hit back harder." The plan came together quickly. The next morning, Glow Up Beauty's stock dropped as the media ran with the leaked formulas. Richard was photographed celebrating at his country club. Then Michelle held a press conference. "Yes, some of our early formulas were leaked," she admitted to the cameras. "That's why we changed them months ago. But what's really important is this. Glow Up Beauty is launching a new foundation, not makeup, but a charitable foundation for victims of corporate fraud." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Our first initiative? Legal support for whistleblowers who expose dangerous beauty products. And our first case? The women harmed by Richard Carter's company." The reaction was immediate. Richard's celebration turned to panic as his remaining investors fled. By sunset, his company's stock was worthless. But Michelle wasn't done. She had one more card to play. "Jessica," she said that evening, "how would you like to tell your story? All of it. The arranged marriage to James, your father's manipulation, the toxic products he forced you to promote." Jessica straightened her spine, one hand on her growing belly. "Will it help other women? It will show them they're not alone, that it's never too late to choose yourself." The story ran in Vanity Fair the next week. Jessica on the cover, glowing, with pregnancy, wearing Glow Up Beauty products. The headline read, "Breaking Free, a story of toxic beauty, corporate greed, and finding your true worth." Richard Carter was arrested 2 days later for securities fraud. The evidence had been there all along. Patricia had made sure of that. In the aftermath, Michelle sat in her garden with Jessica, watching the sunset. The younger woman was reading a marketing textbook, preparing for her summer internship. "I never thought I'd say this," Jessica said, "but losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was so focused on being Daddy's perfect daughter, I forgot to be myself." Michelle squeezed her hand. "Sometimes we have to lose our old dreams to find better ones." Her phone lit up with updates from Paris. Pre-orders for the European launch were breaking records. But more importantly, women were sharing their stories on social media, inspired by Jessica's courage. "We should start a mentoring program," Jessica suggested. "Help other women start over." Michelle looked at the young woman who'd once been her rival, now transformed into family. "I think that's a wonderful idea." Later that night, Michelle added a new entry to her journal. "Today I realized something," she wrote. 20 years ago, I thought I couldn't have children. Now I have a whole family of women, supporting each other, lifting each other up. Sometimes the family you choose is better than the one you planned. Her security system pinged, but this time, when she checked the camera, she smiled. Rachel was pulling up with dinner, and Lisa's car was right behind her. Family dinner. Not the life she'd imagined when she married James, but something better, something real. And tomorrow she would keep building, keep growing, keep helping other women find their light. Because that was the real beauty of second chances. They never had to end. The private hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors. James Thompson lay in the bed, looking smaller somehow, his designer stubble now a scraggly beard. Michelle stood in the doorway, unsure why. She'd come when Patricia called. "He overdosed last night," Patricia said softly. "The rehab center found him in his room. He had your old wedding photo with him." Michelle felt a complicated mix of emotions, pity, anger, and something else she couldn't name. The man who'd once seemed so powerful, who'd crushed her dreams of motherhood and tried to destroy her company, now looked lost and broken. "The doctors say he'll recover," Patricia continued, "but he needs help, real help this time." "Why are you telling me this?" Michelle asked. "Because you're the strongest person I know, and right now my son needs strength." Back at the Glow Up Beauty offices, Michelle tried to focus on work. The European launch was exceeding all expectations, and they were already getting inquiries from Asia. Jessica, now 7 months pregnant, had organized a successful influencer campaign featuring women sharing their second chance stories. Lisa burst into the office, waving a tablet. "Hey, you need to see this. Someone leaked James's overdose to the press. They're calling it karma, saying it's payback for what he did to you." Michelle looked at the cruel headlines, the social media comments celebrating James's downfall. Was this what she'd wanted? Once, maybe, but now it felt hollow. "Call the PR team," she said. "We need to get ahead of this." That evening, Michelle held a press conference. She stood at the podium, cameras flashing, and took a deep breath. 20 years ago, I married James Thompson. When our marriage ended, I turned my pain into purpose and built something beautiful. But success shouldn't mean celebrating someone else's rock bottom. Today, Glow Up Beauty is announcing a new initiative, mental health support for executives dealing with addiction and burnout. The reporters exploded with questions, but Michelle wasn't done. "We talk about second chances. Well, they're not just for women rebuilding their lives. They're for everyone who's lost their way and wants to find their way back." Later that night, Jessica found Michelle in her office, still working. "That was amazing what you did for James," Jessica said, easing her pregnant body into a chair. "After everything he did to you—" "I didn't do it for James," Michelle replied. "I did it because it was right. And because somewhere out there, someone watching might need to know that falling apart isn't the same as being broken forever." Her phone buzzed. A text from James's doctor. He was awake and asking for her. Michelle stared at the message for a long time before responding. The next morning, she walked into James's hospital room. He was sitting up, looking more alert, but still fragile. "Michelle," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I." She sat in the visitor's chair. "Your mother says you're ready for real help this time." James nodded, tears in his eyes. "I lost everything. The company, my reputation, you. I thought I could fill the emptiness with pills and deals and younger women, but it just got bigger." "I know about emptiness," Michelle said quietly. "I lived with it every month when those pregnancy tests came back negative. But you know what I learned? Sometimes emptiness is just space waiting to be filled with something better." "I saw your press conference," James said. "You could have destroyed me. Everyone would have understood. Instead I chose to be someone I could be proud of." Michelle stood up. "The treatment center in Arizona is expecting you next week. Your mother made the arrangements. Will you—" James hesitated. "Will you keep me updated about the baby? I know I don't deserve it, but Jessica has agreed to send you photos once the baby's born, if you stay clean and do the work." Michelle walked to the door, then turned back. "You know, all those years I thought I couldn't have children. Turns out I just needed to redefine what family means." Back at the office, Michelle found a surprise waiting. A group of women from her support network had gathered. Lisa, Rachel, Jessica, even Patricia. They'd brought lunch and questions about the new mental health initiative. "You're really going to help James after everything?" Rachel asked, protective. "As always. I'm going to help anyone who needs it," Michelle replied. "That's what Glow Up has always been about, seeing the beauty in second chances." Jessica rubbed her belly thoughtfully. "The baby kicked when you were on TV yesterday. Maybe she knows her story is part of something bigger." Michelle looked around at these women who'd become her family. Patricia, who'd chosen loyalty to her daughter-in-law over her own son's mistakes. Lisa, whose brilliance had helped build an empire. Rachel, whose fierce love had never wavered. And Jessica, who'd grown from rival to sister. Her phone lit up with another message. The Asian distributors wanted to move up their timeline. The world was waiting for Glow Up Beauty's message of transformation and hope. "You know what we need?" Lisa said suddenly. "A retreat center, somewhere women can go to rebuild their lives. Not just beauty treatments, but real support. Career counseling, therapy, everything." Michelle smiled, already seeing the possibilities. "Why stop there? We could create a whole network of centers, partner with women's shelters, addiction, treatment facilities. Help people find their way back to themselves," Jessica finished softly. That night, Michelle added another entry to her journal. "Today I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let someone else's mistakes define your story. James chose his path and I chose mine. But maybe, just maybe, both paths can lead to healing." Her security system pinged, Rachel arriving with more paint samples for the nursery. They were all helping prepare for the baby, creating a room filled with love and hope. Michelle touched the journal's worn pages. Once she'd written about her dreams of having a child. Now she wrote about building a legacy that would help generations of women and men find their way home to themselves. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't success or forgiveness. Sometimes it was simply becoming more than anyone ever thought. You could be. The Malibu property stretched along the coastline, its modern buildings gleaming in the California sun. Michelle walked through the almost finished retreat center, making notes on her tablet. In 2 weeks, the first Glow Up Renewal Center would open its doors to women seeking transformation. "The yoga studio needs more windows," Lisa said, following, close behind. "We want them to see the ocean from every angle." Michelle nodded, but her attention was drawn to her phone. Another message from the hospital. Jessica had been admitted with early contractions. At 8.5 months pregnant, any day could be the day. "Go," Lisa said, reading her expression. "I've got this covered." The hospital corridors felt different now that Michelle wasn't visiting James. He'd been in Arizona for 2 months, sending weekly updates on his recovery. His latest email had been simple. "I'm learning to sit with the emptiness instead of trying to fill it." Michelle found Jessica in a private room, looking scared but determined. Rachel was already there, holding her hand through contractions. "False alarm," Jessica said with a weak smile. "But the doctor wants me to stay overnight for observation." Michelle sat on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Scared, excited, guilty." Jessica wiped away tears. "I keep thinking about how much you wanted a baby, and here I am, getting one without even trying." "Hey," Michelle squeezed her hand. "This baby is a blessing for all of us. She's going to have so many strong women in her life, showing her what's possible." A nurse came in with monitors and paperwork. "Family only during observation hours," she started to say. "We are family," Rachel said firmly. "All of us." Later that evening, Michelle had a video call with her Asian distribution partners. The Glow Up Beauty line was set to launch in Tokyo, Seoul, and Singapore simultaneously. "The market research is fascinating," her Korean partner said. "Women here love the second chances message. They're tired of being told youth is everything." Michelle smiled, thinking of how far they'd come from that first launch in Los Angeles. Now Glow Up wasn't just a beauty brand. It was a movement. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Board meeting tomorrow. They want to discuss James's future with the company." Michelle felt a familiar tightness in her chest. James had been making progress in rehab, but was he ready to return to the corporate world? And more importantly, was she ready to work with Him again. The next morning, Michelle walked into the Thompson real estate boardroom for the first time since the scandal. The familiar faces looked at her with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. James has requested a position, Patricia began. Not as CEO, but in community outreach. He wants to work with the addiction support programs. We're funding through the foundation. Michelle studied the proposal in front of her. A year ago, she would have dismissed it as another manipulation. But people could change. She was living proof of that. Under supervision, she said finally. And he starts at the bottom, earning trust back one day at a time. Her phone lit up. Rachel's number. Michelle's heart stopped until she read the message. False alarm over. Jessica's coming home, but she wants to talk to you about something important. That evening, Michelle found Jessica in the guest house, surrounded by baby clothes and nursery. Catalogs, I've been thinking, Jessica said, folding tiny onesies. About the baby's name. Michelle sat down, helping to sort the pink and yellow clothes. I want to name her Grace, Jessica said quietly. After your mother. If that's okay? Michelle felt tears welling up. Her mother's name, living on in this child who'd brought them all together in unexpected ways. Grace Thompson, Michelle said, testing the sound. It's perfect, actually. Jessica took a deep breath. I want her last name to be Jackson. Grace Jackson. Because you're more family to her than James or my father ever was. Michelle pulled Jessica into a hug, careful of her belly. Outside, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the colors of new beginnings. Her phone buzzed again, Lisa with updates about the retreat center. The first programs were fully booked, with a waiting list growing daily. Women from around the world were eager to experience the glow-up transformation for themselves. We should set up a nursery at the center, Jessica said suddenly. For mothers who need support. I could help run it once the baby's a little older. Michelle smiled, seeing the changes in the young woman who'd once been focused only on wealth and status. I think that's a wonderful idea. That night, Michelle sat in her home office, looking at old photos. She found one from her wedding day. She and James so young, so full of dreams that turned out to be too small. Her journal lay open on the desk. Today I realized, she wrote, that sometimes the family you were meant to have takes a different shape than you imagined. Sometimes the children who need you aren't the ones you give birth to, but the ones who find their way to your heart. The security system pinged. Lisa arriving with takeout and more plans for the retreat center. Rachel's car pulled up moments later, followed by Patricia's. Another impromptu family dinner. Another chance to sit with these women who'd become her strength, her support, her true family. And somewhere in Arizona, a man was learning to face his demons. Somewhere in a hospital room, monitors beeped steadily over a baby who would be born into a circle of love she hadn't earned, but would always have. Michelle touched her mother's picture on the wall. You were right, Mama, she whispered. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Sometimes he just shows you that you can handle so much more than you ever dreamed. The doorbell rang. Time for family dinner. Time for another evening of laughter, plans, and dreams that kept growing bigger. Because that was the real beauty of second chances. They never had to end. They just kept offering new beginnings, new dreams, new ways to shine. The baby's first cry echoed through the delivery room, strong and clear like a bell announcing a new beginning. Michelle held Jessica's hand as the nurses cleaned and measured the tiny girl who would change all their lives. She's perfect, Rachel whispered, tears streaming down her face as she filmed everything on her phone. Look at those little fingers. Jessica reached out trembling arms as the nurse brought over a pink bundle. Hello, Grace, she said softly. Look at all the aunties who came to meet you. Michelle felt her heart swell as she looked at the baby. This miracle who had brought healing to so many wounds. Grace had her father's nose, but Jessica's delicate features, and a head full of dark hair that curled like Michelle's. Mrs. Jackson. A nurse appeared at the door. There's someone asking to see the baby. A Mr. Thompson. The room went quiet. James stood in the hallway looking better than he had in months. 6 months of rehab had given him back his health, if not his arrogance. Can I meet my daughter? he asked quietly. Jessica looked at Michelle, who nodded. "It's your choice," Michelle said. "Always." James approached the bed slowly, as if afraid the whole scene might disappear. When he saw Grace's face, he started to cry. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother." He looked at Jessica, then at Michelle, all of her mothers. Patricia arrived an hour later, armed with gifts and tears of her own. "My first grandchild," she kept saying, taking photos from every angle. "And look at those cheeks." The next few days passed in a blur of visitors and flowers. The Glow Up beauty team sent a huge basket of baby products specially formulated for newborns. Lisa brought paperwork for Jessica to sign. She was officially joining the company as Director of Youth Outreach once her maternity leave ended. A week later, Michelle stood in the nursery of her home, watching Jessica rock Grace to sleep. The room that had once been a symbol of her deepest loss was now filled with love and life, just in a different way than she'd imagined. "The retreat center called," Rachel said from the doorway. "The first group of women arrives tomorrow. They want to know if you'll speak at the opening ceremony." Michelle nodded. The Glow Up Renewal Center was already making headlines. A place where women could heal, grow, and rebuild their lives. The waiting list stretched months into the future. James asked if he could volunteer there, Rachel added carefully. "Working with the addiction support groups." "What did you tell him?" "That he needs to prove himself first. Start with the outreach program at the foundation, like the board agreed." Michelle smiled. Rachel had always been the protective one, the voice of caution. But people could change. Michelle's whole life was proof of that. That evening, they held a small dinner party to celebrate Grace's homecoming. The dining room was full of laughter and light, with Lisa showing everyone the latest sales figures from Asia, Patricia sharing embarrassing stories about James as a baby, and Rachel coordinating with the retreat center staff on her tablet. "I have an announcement," Jessica said as they finished dessert. "I've been taking online classes and I got accepted to finish my degree, Marketing and Business Administration." The table erupted in cheers. Michelle watched as the young woman, who'd once been her rival, beamed with pride, holding her daughter close. "You'll need help with childcare," Michelle said. "Good thing Grace has so many aunties." "And her grandma Patricia," Patricia added with a wink. "Though I prefer to be called Mimi. Grandma sounds so old." Later that night, after everyone had gone, home Michelle sat in her garden with a sleeping Grace in her arms. The roses she'd planted after James left were in full bloom, their scent mixing with the ocean breeze. Her phone lit up with messages, the European division reporting record sales, the Asian team excited about new market opportunities, the retreat center confirming last-minute details. But for once, Michelle let the business wait. She looked down at Grace's peaceful face, thinking about all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. A year ago, she'd thought her life was over when James left. Now she knew it had just been beginning. The security system pinged. James's car at the gate. He had his weekly visit with Grace tomorrow, part of the careful custody arrangement. They'd worked out. He was really trying to be a better man. Not for Michelle or even for Jessica, but for Grace and for himself. Michelle touched the baby's soft cheek. "You know what, little one? Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, just not in the package you expected." Her journal lay open, on the patio table. "Today I understood," she wrote with her free hand, "that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about who shows up, who stays, who helps you become the person you were meant to be." The moon rose over the ocean, silver light dancing on the waves. In the guest house, Jessica was organizing baby clothes and study materials, building her new life one day at a time. In Arizona, the second Glow Up Renewal Center was under construction. In Tokyo, women were lining up to buy products that promised more than beauty. They promised transformation. Grace stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand gripping Michelle's finger. From inside the house came the sounds of Rachel and Lisa, staying over to help with the night shift. Patricia had left dinner for tomorrow in the fridge, and the retreat center staff had everything ready for opening day. This was her family now, not the one she'd dreamed of as a young bride, but something bigger, something stronger. A circle of women supporting each other, lifting each other up, proving that second chances weren't just about starting over, they were about becoming who you were always meant to be. Michelle kissed Grace's forehead, breathing in that perfect baby smell. "Welcome to the family, little one," she whispered. "It's not a traditional one, but it's full of love." And in the end, that's all that matters. The security system pinged one last time, the night nurse arriving for her shift. Another member of their growing family. Another thread in the tapestry of love and support they'd woven together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to grow. But tonight, under the stars, Michelle Jackson held her family's future in her arms and knew that sometimes the best dreams are the ones you never knew to wish for, because life had taught her the most beautiful truth of all. That love, like beauty, comes in many forms, and the strongest families are the ones we choose, one heart at a time.